Good evening and welcome to True Grit Crime. I am your host, Mia Libra Scales. Today I wanted to come in and kind of have like a little bit of a reading from this really interesting document that I found. I wanted to share it because I really think that it's important to get this type of information out. It's called Increasing the Efficacy of Investigations of Online Child Sexual Exploitation. So this is 164 pages. Don't worry, folks, I'm not going to read all 164 pages like in one sitting right now. I do want to break it up into different lives, but I really feel like this whole write up gives like this really interesting and um, well, it's from 2022. It gives you a almost recent update. Hey, Tanvils, how are you? I haven't seen you in forever. Um, but it kind of gives you an update on like how crimes of like child exploitation are being looked at. So I really kind of just wanted to share it with people. It also talks about like the different apps. Oh, Tian, I am so good. Other than I broke my toe, so I broke my pinky toe, and I fractured the other three toes that are next to it. And it really sucks because like hurts like a mug. But other than that, I'm really good. Like family's good. Um, been, just doing my thing, taking care of my family, following the Delphi case, still going to the hearings. Yeah, ouch is bad. Um, but yeah, how are you? How is your family doing? Anyways, folks, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen so that like we can get started. I just really feel like it's super important information. Um, and yeah, so um, this particular paper is written by Brian Neal Levine. He's PhD, College of Information and Computer Sciences from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Everyone is good. I finally got my ex out. Oh, that's amazing. I bet it feels so good to have that like totally gone. Um, this was written in May of 2022. This paper was prepared with support from the National Institute of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, U.S. Department of Justice, under contract number 2010F underscore 10097. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this publication are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent those of the Department of Justice. Warning: graphic content. The following resources contain graphic material concerning online child sexual exploitation. So we have a table of contents. So there's the introduction, which covers problem statements, why child sexual abuse is rampant, why investigations are an increasing challenge, a path forward, outline of this report, recognizing the bravery of survivors, differences with human trafficking. And then you have a secondary part to it, discovery of venues, perpetrators, and victims, cyber tip reports, detecting CSAM and exploitation, NCMEC cyber tips, discussion, HB sport historic platforms, free web storage, communications platforms, mobile device apps, child exploitations on apps, investigative challenges of apps, organized exploitation enterprises, child exploitation by enterprise, investigative challenges of enterprises, peer-to-peer file sharing networks, child exploitation on P2P file sharing apps, investigative challenges of P2P file sharing apps, websites on anonymous systems, terminology, origins of anonymous systems, how Tor and I2P work, how free networks, child exploitation on anonymous systems, investigative challenges of Tor 12P and Freenet, investigator wellness and training, um, indicators of dangerousness, studies of the prevalence of dual offending, um, A1 female sex offending, B factors observable online that distinguish offending types, factors observable once in custody that distinguish offending types, characterization of federal cases, related analysis of limitations, results, federal cases per year, observable differences related to contact offending, sentencing and pleas, sadistic interests, restitution and judgments of responsibility, moving forward research and policy discussion, research directions, computational assistance, empirical studies, research program strategies, policy implications, inadequate protections for children, inadequate industry requirements, and lack of transparency, protection for industry from Section 230, sentencing, increased assistance from app makers, app stores, device makers, and internet service providers. And then you have the conclusion, acknowledgments about the author, the appendix, Section 401 of the Protect Act of 2008, federal sentencing guidelines, and then there's a references page. So this says executive summary. Nothing in history has transformed the character and practice of child sexual exploitation more than the internet. Individuals who commit child sex crimes use internet services, social networks, and mobile apps to meet minors and each other in ways they can not in person, and to groom victims by normalizing abusive sexual acts. Many of those who commit child sex crimes deceive, coerce, and sexually extort child victims with threats that too often are realized. Individuals who commit child sex crimes use the internet to arrange in-person meetings for hands-on abuse, and they use it to remotely coerce young children to self-produce sexual and sadistic acts. Whether the abuse is hands-on or remote, the images or videos in which an individual captures their are of a child are referred to as child sexual abuse material, CSAM. An ever-growing set of online services are misused daily for the upload and immediate distribution of CSAM, supporting worldwide sharing. The harm to victims of child sexual abuse and exploitation are lifelong. For victims, abuse begins with the harm perpetrated against them, but it does not end when the abuse stops. Victims must relive abuse when being interviewed by rescuing investigators. When testifying in court, they are forced to detail and relive nightmarish memories of their abuse, see the image and videos capturing their abuse, watch as members of the public and the jury see those private images and face the individual who abused them. And for standing up to those who abused them, they risk being identified as part of the legal proceedings to friends, acquaintances, and future employers. Trauma from child sexual abuse continues into adulthood and can include depression, suicidal ideation, and anxiety. Survivors fear that strangers in a business meeting, at a restaurant, or on a street will recognize their face. For survivors, their own child's resemblance to themselves can lead to anxiety. Will a stranger decades later recognize their child from an image of the parent's abuse still available on the internet? Online sexual abuse of children is rampant as a variety of metrics demonstrate. The number of reports per year to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, of CSAM and crimes against children has grown exponentially during the past decade. In 2019, NCMEC received 16.9 million reports regarding 69 million CSAM files, i.e., 2,000 reports per hour. This statistic almost certainly represents a mere fraction of the actual incidence of CSAM, considering that many large tech companies are underreporting, and for years it has been observed that about 40,000 US based computers per month share known CSAM publicly on peer to peer networks internationally. Over 400,000 computers per month share known CSAM. Further, investigators have discovered and shut down many Tor based sites that were focused on child sexual exploitation and supported hundreds of thousands of active users. Many more sites are still operational. Every year, about 2,500 individuals are convicted in federal courts of sexual abuse and exploitation of children, including production and possession of CSAM. The number of cases of sex crimes against children prosecuted successfully in state courts is larger. The number of victims is higher than these statistics suggest, as many sex crimes against children go undiscovered and unreported. Hi, Erin. Welcome in. It's good to see you. One explanation of the pervasiveness of online child sex abuse is that the internet has increased the opportunities for committing these crimes. To state it simply, when motivated individuals have greater unmoderated access to CSAM online, they will likely download it. When they have greater unmoderated access to vulnerable victims online, they will likely sexually exploit them. Further, internet technology is pervasive, inexpensive, and multifaceted. Technology-driven child exploitation is not happening in a single way or on a single type of platform. It is hard to overstate the challenge faced by law enforcement in trying to observe, detect, and act against these crimes. A significant fraction of individuals who use CSAM perpetrate hands-on offenses, but the exact rate is unclear. Research suggests that there are many types of individuals who commit crimes of child sexual exploitation, but studies often consider three idealized types. Number one, those who use CSAM and do not exploit children directly. Number two, those who exploit children directly but do not use CSAM. And three, so-called dual offenders who exploit children directly and use CSAM. Studies vary widely as to how the population of individuals who commit crimes of child sexual exploitation break into each idealized type. For example, one well-known meta-analysis based on 18 combined studies showed that 12% of 4,464 men detected by law enforcement had exploited children directly and also used CSAM. However, for a collection of 6 studies that were based on self-reporting of crimes from individuals who had not been caught or prosecuted, 55% of 523 men had exploited children directly and also used CSAM. Creating an effective method of rescuing children from abuse requires an understanding of what characteristics are correlated with hands-on offending. Many studies over the past 2 decades have evaluated the factors that distinguished those who use CSAM only from those who use CSAM and also commit hands-on offenses. These studies primarily have a goal of increasing the efficacy of diagnosis and methods of treatment for individuals who commit sex offenses. Hence, they do not focus on factors that are available during online investigation or on the management of investigative resources. Research points to access to the internet, antisociality, and sexual deviancy as core factors that explain online CSAM offensive versus contact, i.e., hands on offenses. Individuals who commit the dual offenses of both exploiting children directly and also using CSAM have been found to have greater sexual interest in children, pedophilia, greater access to children, more prior violent offenses, more unemployment, greater substance use disorders, and a greater likelihood of participating in a social network focused on pedophilia. It is worth clarifying that some individuals with pedophilia do not sexually exploit children, and that not all persons who sexually exploit children have pedophilia. Individuals who commit dual offenses are more likely to have had childhood difficulties than those who use CSAM only. No study has concluded that viewing adult pornography leads to an interest in viewing CSAM or that viewing adult pornography is an indicator of dangerousness. Geez, I hope that sample was very skewed, right, Aaron? I know. There is no sample method for reliably targeting and finding the most dangerous individuals at the start of an investigation. For years, the number of individuals committing child sex crimes and the indecence of child sexual exploitation have inundated the investigators assigned to these crimes and the resources they have available. Ideally, investigators could prioritize scarce resource by identifying factors that reliably indicate whether a particular subject of an online child exploitation investigation poses a high risk of harm. Investigators need factors that are precise for any given subject and that can discover all of the most dangerous subjects so that they have a chance of rescuing all exploited children. Inundated. Okay, thank you. Where did I? Okay. Hey, Kayla, welcome in. So I'm gonna go ahead and I guess I'll reread it because I think I lost my spot. All right. Ideally, investigators could prioritize scarce resources by identifying factors that reliably indicate whether a particular subject of an online child exploitation investigation poses a high risk of harm. Investigators need factors that are precise for any given subject and that can discover all of the most dangerous subjects so that they have a chance of rescuing all exploited children. Unfortunately, there is not a single factor or set of factors observable at the start of an investigation. Before significant resources have been allocated, that has been shown scientifically to reliably predict and discover those committing hands-on offenses. For an investigative technique to be effective at managing scarce resources while finding hands-on offenses, it must use online factors only. Online factors are those visible at the initial stages of the investigation, well before the suspect is in custody. A limited set of online factors exist and are not at all available in each case. Furthermore, management of cases is challenging in many ways. Investigators of child sexual exploitation must manage a tremendous volume of NCMEC cyber tips that come from the Center's cyber tip line, the centralized reporting system for the online exploitation of children, and other leads. Each investigator may have 50 cases in progress and others that have been forwarded to affiliated agencies with trained personnel to follow up on. Some investigators may focus on cyber tips, while others may focus on undercover or peer to peer cases. This allocation of effort among undercover, proactive P2P, and cyber tip cases include human sex trafficking cases, is influenced by several competing issues, and it is not based solely on the question of which case indicate the most dangerous individuals. For example, undercover investigations allow a focus on suspects who are actively attempting hands down offenses, and P2P investigations allow the rescue of children who have been silenced and are not covered by cyber tip. Unfortunately, some agencies elect not to run undercover or P2P investigations because they worry about a civil liability from not processing received cyber tips. Regardless, almost no agency can keep up with the number of tips they receive and leads that they can pursue. Investigators use several factors when deciding how to prioritize cases that they expect involve the more dangerous individuals. Cases that involve online enticement, trying to meet with children, production, and sexual extortion, sextortion, are prioritized because these imply that a child is in active danger. Similarly, cases involving images that appear to be more recently produced are prioritized. The severity of content and the age of the victim can increase priority. For example, sexual abuse of infants and toddlers and sadistic acts are prioritized. If a case appears to involve a person who has a position of community significance and access to children, the case is prioritized. Cases involving technology are technically savvy individuals or a community organized around committing offenses are prioritized. Note that MCMEC prioritized cyber tips before sending them to law enforcement. In other words, there is only partial overlap between the set of factors that have been studied to access the risk of the direct treatment of individuals already convicted of child sexual exploitation, and two, the set of factors that are available to law enforcement ahead of allocation of resources for an investigation. Online child sexual exploitation is a public health crisis and should be addressed as one. Online sex crimes against children can be described using a simple epidemiolo- ep- epidemiological model. Children are being harmed by individuals who sexually exploit them, and the internet is an environment that brings the two together. The model illuminates three broad strategies for addressing this crisis: helping investigators stop those committing the crimes, educating children and parents about how to avoid dangerous individuals, and changing the environment to thwart exploitation. Improving the tools available to investigators to stop online sex crimes and to rescue children from abuse is merely one strategy and too often the focus. To significantly reduce online child sexual abuse, it is also necessary to examine how internet services, apps, app stores, and device makers who have children as customers operate and are regulated. Laws against child sexual abuse are numerous and the penalties are significant. These laws are deterrents against those who would commit child sexual abuse, but the laws do not represent mitigations that involve children and technology companies. The legal protection for children using apps and online services are minimal. The regulation for device manufacturers, social networks, app stores, and apps used by children are negligible, and their legal protections are vast. Similarly, many gains would be had from expanding internet safety education, which the tech industry should take part in or lead. Studies suggest that school-based sexual abuse prevention programs already in use are an effective strategy. Overall, we cannot expect law enforcement to address a torrent of harm to children while we ignore the context of the problems upstream. Child sexual abuse happens on every internet platform, and each platform presents a challenge for investigators. The discovery of new venues used as environments to victimize children, the discovery of people victimizing children, and the discovery of victims are persistent requirements for effective investigations of child exploitation. For each known venue, hey, can y'all let it go? Thank you. Um, The discovery of new venues used as environments to victimize children, the discovery of people victimizing children, and the discovery of victims are persistent requirements for effective investigations of child exploitation. For each known venue, investigators require methods to enumerate all those in the venue who are committing crimes against children and to locate victims. Discovery is vital to all victims, but none more so than the victims who have been silenced by fear, who are hospitalized, or who are preverbal. How discovery takes place varies. Some abuse is brazenly public. The abuse continues because it is not reported and because has not yet been investigated due to insufficient law enforcement resources. Some abuse is hidden behind the privacy offered by internet services in these cases. Law enforcement is reliant on reports by industry to learn about abuse, a process that has been largely an apparent failure by industry. Some public abuse is masked by end-to-end encryption, single proxy virtual private network VPN services, and multi-proxy communication, e.g. Tor. Research into advanced forensic methods is required to overcome such hurdles. By maintaining a national corpus of known imagery and victims, the rescue of the new victims can be prioritized over those whose abuse occurred decades ago. Although ending the distribution of existing CSAM is a crucial goal, CSAM has a recidivism of survivors and is used to groom new victims. Cyber tips are essential to investigators, but unreliably filed by industry. An untold number of children have been rescued due to law enforcement investigators responding to an NCMEC cyber tip. Cyber tips are a critical mechanism in addressing crimes against children. Unfortunately, reporting is limited in effectiveness as a method for rescuing all children and as a metric for gauging the scale of child exploitation in the United States. Although reporting is mandated by law, there is no method to determine the rates of compliance by industry. Companies are not required to look for CSAM or signs of grooming and exploitation, and only some do. Some companies do not report because they manage encrypted content, others because they do not look at content, and others because they do not know they are required to report. The frequency of each reason for not reporting is unknown. Companies are not required to register as entities that frequently host content subject to CSAM reporting laws, 18 USC 2258A, nor are staff required to complete training on reporting. There is no list of providers that have not registered with NCMEC, but whose software and platforms are used or may be used to exploit children interactively or through the distribution of CSAM. Further, it is expensive for companies to maintain staff who are dedicated to examining potential CSAM. And just like for law enforcement, the task of examining CSAM is a troubling mental burden. In other words, the fiscal incentives are at odds with social responsibility, and the lack of regulation allows for industry to decide how to resolve that disparity. Apps are used heavily by minors, and under moderated apps are profitable hunting grounds for individuals looking to exploit minors. Smartphones and apps they run are, oh, I don't even know that word. Ubiquitous? I don't know. About 79% of US children obtain a phone before the age of 15. Social networking apps and multiplayer games include young children prominently among their users. For example, one third of TikTok's 49 million US users are reportedly age 14 or younger. Even though the app is rated teen by Google and 12 plus by Apple, ratings for apps in Apple App Store and Google Play Store have no relationship with the risk that children are exposed to. Instead, rating indicates the maturity of content that is not censored by the app, and a great deal of inappropriate content, including CSAM, is viewed and exchanged before it is removed. The quality of an app's moderation of user content does not affect the rating. We are unaware of efforts by Apple or Google to warn parents or children about exactly which of the apps that they sell have been linked to child sexual exploitation by users, by law enforcement, and in courts. There is no characterization of user generated content on apps, and the historic quality of the app's moderation process when children and parents turn on their phone for the first time. There is no public service announcement that inform and educate them about the internet safety. There is no mention of NC MEC or cyber tip laws 18 USC 22588 on Apple's site for app developers. Google reminds developers only of the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, Europe's General Data Protection Regulation laws, and other applicable laws or regulations. There are almost no regulations on the commercial platforms leveraged by individuals to groom and exploit minors. Um, let's see. Unfortunately, companies are not required to report exploitation unless they look for it, and they are not required to look. The regulations that do exist are limited to protecting children age 12 and younger, and they are incongruent with the deviant acts that are perpetrated. COPPA does not require software makers and social networking sites to provide protection to children from other users and forums. Section 230 of the Commission's Decency Act is designed to shield providers from liabilities from their users' actions, including child sex crimes. In 2018, Section 230 was updated to remove protection for providers from civil or criminal claims related to sex trafficking and prostitution, including children. But the law still does not apply to providers that facilitate or recklessly support child sexual exploitation, child sexual abuse, and production or distribution of CSAM when those acts have no commercial purpose. Oh. Many victims suffer from remote exploitation by individuals whom they met on apps. Victims can suffer emotionally from being caught up in a false, abusive, and demeaning relationship or caught up in a cycle of sextortion. Self production of CSAM that results from sextortion has a very damaging effect on victims. It is a hands on offense in that the victim is forced to abuse themselves. Victims have been forced to scrawl offensive slurs on their body, insert objects into their genitals, and perform sex acts with animals. Victims have been forced by persons who exploit them to leave family dinners to self produce CSAM from a bathroom. Practitioners who speak to victims of coerced self produced abuse find that they will tell a story of a hurt and abuse that is as severe as the experience of victims who are physically abused in person. Practitioners often observed an increase in deviancy from individuals who exploit children remotely. One victim said to an investigator, "I don't know what it's like to be AR'd, but I know what it's like to R myself." Further, when victims are exploited by someone who present a false identity, the victim feels blindsided when the truth is revealed, shattering their belief and confidence. Okay, Aaron, I'll see you back in a bit, or you can catch the replay. Thanks for coming. Uh, Children's privacy is lessened when they are protected by tools designed for adults. Too many platforms do not consider children's accounts differently in terms of technology. For example, a platform may decide that its users' privacy is increased by offering end to end encryption instead of transit encryption, where the platform itself is an endpoint. That conclusion does not hold for children. The privacy of a child is increased more with the transit encryption. For example, platforms cannot detect and report CSAM and grooming of children if communication among and to children are end to end encrypted. And law enforcement cannot attribute such behavior to a real internet address if accounts of children and those who communicate with children are allowed to connect from VPN based services and Tor based anonymizing proxies. Children do not purchase paid VPN services, nor do they understand how to use Tor. Some exploitation of children is from adults who do not hide their age from children, and some exploitations is from adults who portray themselves as children. In either case, to have a chance at catching those adults, platforms themselves have to look for abuse and keep records to seed investigations. Platforms that deploy advanced privacy tools for adults who wish to communicate with other adults securely should do so as a distance system and design choice. When these advanced tools are deployed for children, the result is ironically a reduction in child's privacy by allowing adults to commit exploitation and evade justice. Um, The consequences of a lax approach of moderation by industry can be disastrous. A disturbing trend of the last 10 years was the appearance of tight knit groups of adults organized to groom, coerce, and sexually exploit children. Each such group created sophisticated methods and used well defined rules to ensure their enterprises were efficient at sexually abusing minors and at evading detection by law enforcement. None involved money or sex trafficking. All told, just six groups victimized thousands of very young children with sex abuse and coerced depraved acts. These groups leveraged websites that were particularly poor at moderation. The cases demonstrate how social media sites and apps have been leveraged by a community of people committing CSAM offenses to find victims and each other and to train each other and normalize their deviancy. These cases also show that individuals without a criminal history can nonetheless commit crimes that inflict terrible damage upon thousands of victims, and they demonstrate that such individuals are crossing jurisdictional borders within the United States and intentionally or internationally to team up. Peer to peer file sharing networks are a perennial resource for distributing and archiving CSAM to an international community. Oh my goodness. Sorry, guys. Um, as noted above, P2P file sharing networks are very popular. One of the main challenges of P2P file sharing is that the systems are designed for archiving content. Files shared and traded on P2P networks can remain available and accessible for decades. There is no central point of control, no single server to investigate and shut down. In these networks, there is rarely anyone regulating a policy about what can be shared. The networks themselves are difficult to shut down. For example, Gnutella is decades old and there are still users on it sharing known CSAM. Fortunately, many investigations of CSAM trafficking on P2P networks led to persons who commit contact offense. Studies suggest that of the people who share CSAM on P2P networks, those who share CSAM that is sadistic or abusive of toddlers or infants are twice as likely to have committed contact offenses. Even if an individual is abusing a child who is too young to speak, silenced by fear, or unable to speak due to illness, the separate actions of that individual on P2P file sharing network can catch the attention of investigators. Oh my goodness. Anonymous networks such as Tor and Freenet support a great deal of CSAM and child sexual exploitation activity. These tools were designed to enhance the privacy of dissidents and journalists, but generally fail to do so. Many studies and law enforcement operations have discovered hundreds of anonymous websites on Tor and Freenet that were devoted to illegal content, including CSAM. Tor Onion services support the actions of tremendously large international communities of people committing crimes against children. Child exploitation sites on Tor have been shown to host 168,000 visitors per day and have hundreds of thousands of active users. These systems have been developed by ideology driven project teams that have rejected all responsibility for crimes against children that occur with their technology. These harms are downplayed and omitted from the publications of the computer scientists who advocate the technology, flouting the ethical code of their professional societies. Without investigators, there are no investigations. Wellness is critical. Personnel in all types of law enforcement and forensic laboratory work require mental health and wellness support. Many studies have documented the harm to investigators and digital forensic examiners of child sex crimes in particular. For example, studies have found that one quarter of law enforcement officers who focus on child sex crimes have high or severe secondary traumatic stress. In another study of law enforcement, hey, no, ma'am, you better stop it. Um, okay. In another study of law enforcement, 20% of respondents knew a colleague who had sought counseling as a result of their work with CSAM. These wellness problems can also affect persons in industry on child exploitation moderation teams and the prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges who are involved in these cases. Research recommendations. Advances in many research areas would increase the efficacy of child exploitation investigations and rescue of children. Online child exploitation is a technology driven crime, and investigators from law enforcement and industry would see many benefits from new advances in computer science. The primary topics that must see investment include novel methods of network attribution and mitigating the protections of anonymizing proxies, geographic localizations from content and network features, detection of oh, predation and grooming in text and video, victim identification and image analysis. Several empirical studies would advance understanding and inform policy and research. These include studies of the rate of dual offending, deviance levels in remote exploitations, wellness needs for law enforcement, compliance of industry, and the economic burden of online crimes against children. Further, we suggest greater engagement with the computer science academic community by government agencies focused on crimes against children. Policy recommendations. We recommend many changes in policy to assist law enforcement in focusing their scarce resource on the most dangerous individuals committing child sex crimes. Protection of children online stems from the deterrence of law forbidding sex crimes and CSAM, as well as from COPPA's regulations that impede marketing and not much more. The lack of legal protections for children online is in stark contrast to the many child safety regulations governing other consumer spheres, such as toy labeling, cribs, bicycles, bunk beds, choking hazards, flammable clothing, refrigerators, packing on poison, cigarettes, plastic, and gasoline containers. In exchange for complete liability protection via Section 230, the tech industry has enacted lax self regulation. In the full report, we list many suggestions for industry to protect the right and safety of children without impeding the rights and privacy of adults. Greater scrutiny and greater compliance are required of app developers, app stores, device makers, and internet service providers. Child sexual abuse is endemic to our society and it has been exacerbated by the internet, which people leverage to meet and exploit children. Online sexual abuse of children is rampant and must be addressed. The antidote to endemic harm is Mallorism, the belief that through our action we can improve the world for all. If we want to change the state of this crime, it is time to take action and make child safety, privacy, and well being the highest priority of our law and tech industry. Mm, okay. Nothing in history has transformed the character and practice of child exploitation more than the internet. Never before has a technology offered support for these crimes that is, in the worst way possible, more reliable, effective, and innovative. Individuals committing these crimes use internet services, platforms, and apps to meet minors in ways they cannot in person and to deceive, coerce, and sexually extort victims. The art of a child captured as images or videos referred to as child sexual abuse material, CSAM, can be shared immediately and widely using the internet. Individuals can live stream the SA of children across the globe or archive CSAM on file sharing sites and network where they are traded for decades into the victim's adulthood. People who exploit children use various internet technologies to meet and coordinate with each other, mask their identities, and acts and evade justice. All crimes against children should be investigated because all children deserve protection, rescue from abuse, and justice for these crimes. But for years, the number of individuals committing these crimes and the number of incidences of child sexual exploitation have inundated investigators and far outspaced the resource they have available. The goal of this report is to identify investigative factors that reliably indicate whether a subject of an online child exploitation investigation poses a high risk of harm to children per Section 401 of the Protect Our Children Act of 2008. Reliable indicators would help investigators prioritize scarce resources to those cases where there is actual hands on abuse by the suspect. CSAM is often referred to as child pornography, but these materials are not pornography and are not consensual. It is inappropriate to refer to a visual or videographic record of the abuse or art of a child as child porn, kiddie porn, or similar terms. Okay. An investigative factor or a set of factors is reliable if at least two primary features are present. First, it must accurately determine whether a particular suspect has committed a hands on offense. It must have high precision. Second, the factor must enable investigators to find ideally all of those committing hands on offenses so that they have a chance to rescue all exploited children. It must have high recall. More importantly, scarce resources can be prioritized only if identification of the most dangerous subjects occur at the start of the investigation. Resources have already been allocated if a suspect is in custody. Even writing a search warrant ahead of custody represents an allocation of resources. The set of factors that are sometimes observable to investigators before resources are allocated is limited and includes whether reported CSAM appears to be recent and involves a previously unseen victim, whether the incident involves an attempt to meet a minor rather than, for example, the distribution of CSAM files, the severity of the CSAM files distributed, that is, whether the images include the sexual abuse of infants or toddlers, and the apparent technical savvy of the person who committed the crime. There is not a single factor or set of factors observable at the start of an investigation that have been shown scientifically to have reliably high precision or high recall with efficiency in predicting higher danger in hands on abuse. The factors that have been studied scientifically and that correlate well with hands on offenses are generally observable to an investigator only once a suspect is in custody, i.e., after resources are allocated. As we discussed, according to the latest research, the factors that correlate more with hands on offenses include 253 greater sexual interest in children, pedophilia, greater access to children, more prior violent offenses, more unemployment, greater substance use problems, and greater likelihood of participating in a social network focused on pedophilia. Such factors can be reliably measured in person only, and even then, sometimes cannot be measured reliably. Why child sexual abuse is rampant. One criminological explanation of the pervasiveness of child sexual abuse is that the internet has increased the opportunities for committing these crimes. Routine activity theory predicts that, to put it simply, when a motivated individuals have greater unmoderated access to CSAM online, they will likely download it. And when motivated individuals have greater unmoderated access to victims online, they will likely sexually exploit them. Several studies have shown that people planning to commit a child sex crime select victims based on ease of access, perceived vulnerabilities, and attraction. In short, when greater access to CSAM or victims is coupled with a lack of supervision that would thwart the crime, the result is more crime. Further, internet technology is not only pervasive and inexpensive, it is multifaceted. Thus, technology driven child exploitation is not happening in a single way or on a single type of platform. In other words, even if a method were available to reliably determine the dangerousness of individuals who are exposing children online, it is hard to overstate the challenges faced by law enforcement in observing these crimes and being in a position to act. Why investigators are in and increasing challenge. An ever-growing set of online services are used daily for upload, distribution, and trade of CSAM. Internet forums, including social media sites, influencer platforms, and gaming platforms, are used by adults to contact children and form relationships that can lead to sexual solicitation and sexual exploitation. Video streaming software is used to share and sell live abuse of children. Live streaming services have extended the reach of individuals who abuse children and any children who have a mobile device or live in an internet connected home. Children are sexually abused in their room even though their parents are down the hall. Many fear that these scenarios have become increasingly common during the COVID-19 pandemic. New apps, platforms, websites, and technologies are launched continuously. Practitioners report that too often software platforms, new and old, are operated by companies that are ignorant of crimes against children, do not dedicate resources to a moderating content, and users are unresponsive to lawful law enforcement process. As a result, investigators must spend resources discovering venues and platforms leveraged to exploit children. If they are public, investigators have allocated resources to maintaining a corpus of CSAM and thereby denoting known victims. To do so, they required the ability to process evidence quickly, reliably, and thoroughly. But the amount of data involved in investigations is growing as quickly as consumer grade hardware, e.g., storage, cameras, and networking, and is increasing in sophistication. The tech savvy of those who exploit children is increasing, and so is the availability of technology and consumer products that can mask CSIM content and criminal acts. Encrypted content prevents monitoring and moderation, and therefore it also prevents reporting. Technology that can mask network location is commonly available. In such cases, law enforcement often cannot attribute acts to geographic location, which makes it harder to justify allocating resources from agencies with limited jurisdiction, e.g., state law enforcement. Individuals involved in CSAM production and distribution are forming online communities to train each other in how to evade detection, destroy evidence, and groom victims into accepting sexual abuse as normal behavior. As we discuss, the availability of high bandwidth live streaming to personal devices owned by children has been leveraged repeatedly by organized enterprise level groups of adults who exploit children on a massive scale. Communities of people who abuse children, whether organized into enterprises or merely communicating on message boards, normalize each other's criminal behavior and downplay their exploitation of minors. Hands on abuse is not the only problem. Investigators report the importance of allocating their resources to stop the trade of CSAM files as well. That objective is critical for several reasons. The trade of CSAM is a recidivism of the abused and a source of trauma for victims into adulthood. Downloaded CSAM is shown to a new victim as grooming technique. Adults in possession of CSAM also use it to masquerade as a fellow child to victims, which makes it easier for them to groom their victims. Another reason these investigations are challenging is that they exert a high price on investigators' well being. For example, investigations increasingly involve the art and sadistic abuse of infants and toddlers. Child exploitation units see high turnover of personnel without investigators who are healthy and fully trained. We cannot have investigations. ID, a path forward. A great deal of insight can be gained from viewing online child sexual exploitation as a public health crisis. It is a crime that is an endemic to our technology driven society. It persists and is a widespread as the internet. Unfortunately, the law enforcement response has become a de facto triage process due to many reasons, including the challenges listed above. Triage is an approach traditionally applied to health crisis in localized areas where the damage is acute, unplanned for, or overwhelming of resources. In other words, triage is for epidemics and pandemics, sudden afflictions that subside, and not chronic endemic problems. A different approach is required. So, figure one is the epidemiological triad applied to child sexual exploitation. So it says the host who is harmed, which is the child, education, software, medical, psychological care, individuals who prey on children, forensic methods of investigations, cyber tip, moderation, sentencing, policy, legislation, corporate responsibilities, social change, internet websites, platforms, etc. The Epidemiological triad is a simple model of harm that can be applied to internet based child exploitation to eliminate a way forward. The triad model was designed originally for the study of infectious disease. It has since been applied more broadly, including to motor vehicle injuries, obesity, and smoking. The triad is composed of external agents that cause harm, susceptible hosts affected by the harm, and the an environment that brings the host and agent together. The environment includes any factors that affect the prevalence or severity of the harm, but are not the agent or the host. We can adapt this viewpoint easily. The persons who commit child sexual abuse are agents. The vulnerable children who are harmed are hosts. And the internet, including apps, social networking sites, websites, storage sites, and peer to peer systems, is the environment. From this perspective, there are many mitigations that can be applied to each point in the triad. As figure one illustrates, increasing the efficacy of investigations and it is a mitigation that can be applied to one point of the triad only. Investigative factors that reliably predict hands on abuse might be found in the future with additional research. However, regardless of that outcome, the effectiveness of law enforcement agencies and their management of resources would be improved by reducing the overall incidence of this crime through environmental strategies. Such reduction strategies would involve understanding how the environment brings the agent and host together and then controlling the environment. In other words, understanding the mitigating role of the internet platforms, e.g., apps, social networking sites, and websites, and allowing individuals to hunt for victims and coordinate with others who abuse children. Blalock and Bork studied six child exploitation manuals authored by persons who have sexually abused children and found that the manuals were not focused okay, sorry about that. Um, so, in other words, understanding the mitigating role of the internet platforms, e.g., apps, social networking sites, and websites, and allowing individuals to hunt for victims and uh, coordinate with others who abuse children. Blacklock and Bork studied six child exploitation manuals authored by persons who have sexually abused children and found that the manuals were not focused on where to find children. They are everywhere. Instead, the focus was on accessibility. That is where to find the children who can easily be acquired. So I'm going to leave that for part one. I've got to get dinner cooked for my family, and then I will come back. Right now, we are on page 18. Um, and if you are interested, have any comments, please feel free to leave them in the comments section. And I will see you guys back for part two. Thanks for listening.